So as a result of this, I decided that elections are too important to be left to government. Okay. And I found a way, just like famously the internet is said to be able to route around disruption, I found a way to conduct elections without involving governments. And this work is recorded. You can also find links to it on my website. And it's called random sample voting. I got a big deal keynote at this event that only has one keynote every 2 years to speak about it. I was told by the social choice community that I invented this new thing, and it was really great. They all loved it. We have implemented it, tested it at a lot of security conferences, deployed it by invitation for a binding election by the Council of Europe. It's called random sample voting or sample voting, and it is the perfect thing for blockchain governance because unlike all other voting schemes that I'm aware of, it actually scales both with the complexity of the issues and the size of the voting population. And it does that because it samples, and I found that, in fact, it actually emulates very, very closely the way ancient Greek democracy actually worked, which was by the binding results of the jury system there. That's the way it actually works. And so it's a proven democratic structure. It is the kind of democracy that in 140 years created Western civilization, and now finally, because of web browsers on smartphones, we have reached an inflection point where it's now applicable to governance at this scale. Then it worked for 30, 40,000 people. Now it can scale to any size because any person can use the web to investigate any issue to a surprising depth. So it's a way to create a scalable, fine-grained democracy that doesn't have any centralized point of control. You can actually have tournaments to create the questions that are voted on. So it's quite an interesting and wonderful new thing, and that is what Elixir Praxxis plans to use in the governance of our blockchain as it goes mainnet.
That's interesting. I'm going to go a little more practical direction with my answer, just because this is kind of like where our head is at right now. Basically, to me the question is like, how do you go from zero to something? How do you go from heavily centralized to ideal? And in an ideal world, if we could just give, in our case, we're a platform, we have a token. If we could give everyone in the world a token, and if they actually valued it, that would be kind of the ideal distribution method. It's at least a place to start. The problem is a couple things. One, I agree that the cool thing about the space is you can't shut it down. There's these things out there that we don't control. What if they start reproducing? Like it's this crazy concept that we create something and it's free. What the open question is, I think, is more around proof of stake though, and whether we can actually replicate that. And I think it's a 0 to 1 step with proof of stake. This isn't based on electricity. This is based on kind of a group value in the token. So I think in that case, there's really two ways you got to get people organized. There's people that already kind of believe in the mission, the vision, and your platform, the solution, and in general proof of stake networks, that's include the people like the validators, existing token holders, and the users, if you have users. And there's lots of ways to get them engaged in governance. And eventually, you want to hand the keys over to them with useful voting mechanisms. But then there's the vast majority of everyone else who doesn't believe or doesn't know. And again, on a very practical level, the best I think we can do is try to make the easiest to use platforms for existing developers to develop the applications that somebody's going to come to, not necessarily because the system it's on can't be shut down, but because it's useful and because it works as smoothly as their Uber or their Airbnb. Because without actual usage,
Right.
what are you governing anyway?
Yeah, exactly. So actually, it's a really nice segue to the next question. Yeah.
I'd like to add
Yes,
that
of course.
So first of all, so here at Algorand, we do, in the sense of governance, every token essentially has one vote and is equal to every other token. So that is different from systems in which, there are some tokens which are more special than others, the ones which are bonded or put in the middle of the table. In Algorand, whether you don't need to be in the middle of the table. If you have one token, you have one vote. If you have two tokens, you have two votes, because this is we are talking here about money. So, but we skipped our consensus, but I'd like to make a point about consensus. The original definition that Eric said, it was very labor intensive, but it was very profound. So everybody starts, what is Byzantine agreement? Everybody starts with one value in his head. Now we have a conversation. And at the end of our conversation, if the majority of the players are honest, all the honest people output the same thing. So what does this mean? And if everybody starts with the same thing, then they actually output that thing, right? So I don't know what is in your mind, what value is in your mind, you don't know what is in my mind, we talk, at the end it says, okay, I terminate. And the answer is 27. I automatically know that who else is honest among you? And I don't know who is honest, but sees the same 27 number that I locally have output. Okay? That's as Byzantine again. So, but the process of this discussion required 1 round of discussions, 2 rounds of discussions, 3 rounds of discussions. How many rounds? As many bad people we want to tolerate. So if we have, say, a discussion with a million people, 300,000 of which may be dishonest, you have to talk 300 plus 1 time. Can you believe it? Of course it takes too long. So Mr. or Mrs. Nakamura had this beautiful idea, so we are going to change consensus. We are going to go into this, think of it, diluted consensus. You never reach consensus, but once the fact that I attach to David's block and David attaches his block to Eric's block, then gives us at some point in time, you say, well, there may be a fork, but the longer we go, the more clear we reach consensus on that block, right? And that was actually much faster than having 300,000 and counting rounds of communication. But it never quite reached consensus. It was always more and more and more probable that we have actually agreed on something. It was a diluted process. So the pendulum went from this one up to this proof of work. Now the pendulum is swinging back. Why? Because one of the advantages that David and I have is that we've been around for a long time, and so somehow I was around when the Byzantine agreement was actually started a debate. By the way, by another physicist. So there must be some reasons the physicists are attracted to Byzantine agreement. I actually started in physics too, then I changed to mathematics. I don't know why. So in Algorand we agree on our block. Right? What does it mean? What are these values that we have in our hands? Assume that we have somehow k blocks in the sequence, and our idea is what is block k plus 1. Based on these k blocks, I see a bunch of valid transactions which are gossiping around. I see, oh, this is valid, that is valid, that is valid. I compile this list. To me, this is the block. This list is the next block. David has seen more or less the same transaction that I've seen, because, right, but not, perhaps, however, we may disagree a little bit, right, in 10%, because some transaction goes first through me and then to him, and some transaction by gossiping goes first to him and then to me. So we have a little bit of this, but But his list is maybe very similar to mine, but it's actually a different list. I cannot just, we cannot have this ambiguity, and so on and so forth. So, who has the right to attach which block? And in Algorand, we do something very bizarre. You know what? We agree on a block. So, if we started with the same value, fine. If otherwise, we talk and talk and talk until we agree on a block. Less talking, however, is super fast. That's how the difference. So we actually agree on a block. Why do I tell you all that? Because if you look at this level, it's not a diluted process. Input, we want to agree on a block. Discussion, block approved. Next block, next agreement. Next block, next agreement. We have a general agreement process. On what do we agree on? On anything we want. So 99.9% of the time, we agree on the next block. But we have the ability to agree on anything we want. In particular, how about a change of a protocol? Are we in favor or not? We agree on that. Or do we want to adopt a new monetary policy? We can adopt on that. By the way, we have a mechanism to implement governance. I want to be honest with you. This workhorse, this mechanism is not governance. It's a tool for governance. But governance is chosen by the people. So we must figure out how do we put the thing. So, and this is a social process. I have no better ideas than you have, and we should discuss maybe to see. But let me tell you what at least what I'm thinking about. And you see when the workhorse comes from. The workhorse doesn't solve a problem because it's a human problem. So I really believe that we are going to have a foundation, right? And the foundation is going to have, say, think about economic governance, an economic committee. The economic committee is going to have 3 people rotating. Everybody's in charge for 3 years, so every year somebody says, bye-bye colleagues, I go do something else, and somebody else is elected. So how do we elect it? We vote on the thing. So now we have, and so what they have is the ability, which is a little bit decentralization, but actually a guidance, to say, this 3 people committee have the power of proposing to the community a new economic policy. That's what they should do. That is a great power, because we can vote and agree on anything you want, but it's like this, somebody has to tell what are the options, okay? These guys give options. They propose an option, they register on the blockchain. We must give, say, I'm making it up, 6 months to discuss, but having put it on the blockchain at time T, you know that 6 months later, a block number N, we shall be a vote on their proposal. You know, that is better than nothing, but it gives a lot of power to this economic committee. What if I am an Algorand user, I'm not part of this committee? Sure, in 3 years the committee will be new and I can vote some other member, but what if I don't feel represented by this committee? It can happen. Then I have the right to coagulate according to, they never put to vote my proposal. I have a great idea for the protocol, for economic governance. They never propose it. I feel underrepresented. What do? I find, I'm making it up again this number, 5% of the tokens who are in agreement with me. And if I prove a certificate that 5% of the tokens want to put to vote this proposal, I put to vote my 5%, and now we're becoming as powerful as the committee itself. They don't have the monopoly of proposing what to vote on. If you get enough a percentage of voting in your favor, you have the right to force a vote of the community, and in 6 months later, the community expresses itself, and that is valid. So, but the way I see it is that it has to be a mechanism, and there has to be a social mechanism to choose all these things, or what to unleash the power of this vote.
So if I may, I just had just 30 seconds. So just a 1-sentence answer to a question in terms of governance, and I'll answer first. Basically, we all have a consensus algorithm, we all have platforms, right? And governance is basically, okay, who makes the decision, what the decision is, how they make the decision. Now, in our case, for example, pricing or the roadmap, we have 39 companies that make the decision, whether it's to change the pricing or whatever in the platform. So, in one sentence, who chooses if things need to be changed, whether it's the platform or the consensus algorithm or code, in your case?
Practically, it's a foundation of representatives of all the participating members of the network.
Okay.
So representative rotating membership representation from our validators, our users, our
Right.
token holders, our developers.
The community.
Yeah, with token vote representation.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it's a pity to have to say so, but these governance structures you just heard are modeled after the way nation states are governed, and
Right.
this, in my view, is a failed model. So what, as like a better way to do it is to have a system that allows anyone to propose an issue and to have basically voting on the issues that will be put to the public vote. So it doesn't have the kind of inherent plutocracy aspect that these other systems have. You don't need a lot of money to try to get something on a ballot like we have in those few cases today in nation state governance that do actually allow ballot initiatives. I'd like to make another comment, but I look at, if you love the way government works today, then that's fine. But when you're starting to deal with something that has potentially a much greater complexity, which is all the different code updates, the type of governance that we have today is inadequate for it. So you need a kind of system that scales with the complexity and the size of blockchain. So modeling after current systems or modeling after corporate governance is probably not the way you want to go. And I'd like to mention one other thing though, because you see, democracy for the last couple hundred years has been based on the idea of secret ballot. None of the systems that we have in blockchain today allow for secret ballot, and moreover, blockchain itself can destroy secret ballot globally. If you can pay people, you can buy votes from people in other countries using digital currency, you can just kiss democracy goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
So what's actually needed is a voting system that allows what's called secret ballot. That means you cannot sell votes. The only known way to solve that is something that I invented, I'm sorry to have to say, but this is done with what we call decoy ballots. It's what we use in random sample voting. So anyone can get decoy ballots. They're indistinguishable in perpetuity from real ballots, and they can then be sold with impunity to basically drive the price of bought votes down. So there's academic referee publications by people at Harvard on this that support this approach, and it does work. And you'll love this, the basis for it, and it's a subtle thing, but we have to have something which is called proof of decoy. Sounds like a blockchain concept. So in other words, just being able to give out indistinguishable decoy ballots is not enough. You have to have a way to convince the person who's receiving the decoy ballot, who's going to then try to sell it, that it is in fact a decoy and will not be counted. So by a separate channel, you have to provide them a proof that it won't be counted. Otherwise, the entity running the election can give real ballots to people and tell them they're decoy ballots. Those people will tend to sell them to people on the opposite side of the issue from them, and that way, the entity running the election can manipulate the outcome. So actually, if you want democracy in governance, you need ballot secrecy, which strictly implies the ability to prevent vote selling, and the only way to do it that I know of is by using decoy ballots. But in order to use them effectively, you need proof of decoy. So we built all this and deployed it in the Council of Europe election. It seems to work
And
fine.
who votes? The token holders vote? Like who actually votes? Who does the decoy voting? There's some voting goes on. So who are the voters?
Okay. So you can say, and I think that the Algorand approach is quite elegant. Just say, well, plutocracy is a great system, and the more money you have, the more votes you should have, and that is exactly the corporate governance rules. You know how stock, corporate governance works. It's all based on the number of shares. There's no, and these are transparent elections. I don't think that's the kind of thing that you want for governing something that has people's personal information in it, that can control the prosperity of individuals and their digital sovereignty. So what you need is a way to allow actual democracy. And so then the question is, okay, can the votes be civil attacked? And this, I think, is what you're wondering about.
Because we're
So-
proof of stake, so one token is one vote, similar to you.
Yeah, I
So
think.
Well, I
that's the
think like
consensus.
everyone is like proof of stake
But
here.
I just-
But let's just finish the conversation.
And then
So
we'll move on.
briefly.
We can talk after.
I mean, the governance is such a philosophical thing, so I think we can talk about over like wine whole night, right? Because even like when the French Revolution happened in 1789, and we came all the way, and we are right now in democracy. And some people don't think this is the best, like the governance, right? So again, it's like very philosophical. I want to hear more, to be honest, but because we have limited time, I just need to listen to Silvio briefly, and then we need to go on to the next
So who
conversation.
decides?
Okay, so guys, there is a lot of, so we must dissect issues, making them small in order to talk to them deeply and solve them. So now we're going to say political democracy. Well, a blockchain is a cryptocurrency is not a political democracy. I'm sorry. If you want to do some of these tools, you can use them to implement politically. But if you have an economic system, it is only right that the people who have invested more and believe it more, they actually have a bit more to say how the money is going to be governed, okay? So, are we going to export, and what do we do about democracy? That's a different problem. It's a political problem which has nothing to do with this, is a cryptocurrency. Second of all, clarification number one. Clarification number two, David is absolutely right. If you want to vote, privacy is important. But I want to talk about something even earlier than privacy, which is whatever I think that Sami and Eric were discussing. We can vote with privacy and with decoy and the right way that David tells us to vote, but who chooses the damn topic?
Yeah.
So that is the problem. That is the problem number one. Who puts the topic? Now, to the point that Sami was saying, it is going to be a path to decentralization. It can be decentralized. So my proposal would be, as long as there is a foundation and there is 3 people rotating, let these 3 people propose them. But guess what? Even in a traditional representative democracy that David despises, people once in a while they figure, those people in the government were elected for 4 years, they don't represent me. What you do have? You have a remedy, which is a referendum. You bypass everybody and you do you propose a referendum. A referendum is a very complicated system today in a democracy. If I go to Rome and I want to go back home and see a few arts and temples and churches and paintings, I'm stopped all the time if there is a referendum because they ask me to vote. And there is a bunch of everywhere you cannot walk. There are a bunch of notary publics who interview you, want to read your ID, they want to know your dot, sign here, and these signatures to be verified with you and not double voted and so on and so forth. Is an expensive property. So what do we want here instead is, again, adding technology at the service of society. I may want to do one thing. You must have a 5%. Forget the initial step of this committee. What I propose, at least in Algorand, using Algorand tools, because that's the tools we have, but at least it is going to work as follows. I want to have 5% of the community, of the tokens, to propose an issue on which to vote. How the hell am I going to do? So talk around, so are you a community member of Algorand, and so would you want to, it's going to be impossible. So what I'm going to do, I post on the blockchain an issue, and you say, if you feel that this issue is worth forcing a vote of the entire community, self-select yourself. The same cryptographic lottery, which we recommend to select the committee, now you can self-select yourself by the same mechanism to express, I'm in favor of this vote. And if all of a sudden a few votes by sampling, which is the true way to do this, show up, and this small sample proves that there is out there a 5% consensus that that is an important issue, now, 6 months later, everybody selects themselves to vote on that issue. So, privacy, absolutely. But before that is on what are we voting? And so this mechanism that I'm proposing, I think is really direct, because you cannot just say, anybody can propose something to vote. I leave a blockchain and do something else, because everybody say, vote on this, vote on this, vote on this. You must have a certain number of people that realize it's an important issue. Otherwise, we'll keep on voting. I prefer to be a subject of an empire than a citizen in which everybody can force me to vote every hour of the day. So I think that is so. Initially, I think that will be this representative democracy is a bit classical. But that is just to get started. But then later, what I think is the right way to do is a direct way. But we must distill first what is worthwhile voting by proving that there is an initial consensus of say 5-10% you decide, and then you do the rest.
Great, thank you so much. Really, I mean, it's such a great opportunity that we are able to hear from the word blockchain gurus on their philosophy on the governance and consensus. We just have to move on. I want to make it really short, just because, as Eric mentioned, technology is useless even though they solve trilemma or whatever, if there is no use cases. And the next panel is actually the use case panel, and we have some of devs here are participating in the panel. So I want to know, number one, just very quickly, 30 seconds each, what kind of devs are building on top of your platform? Number two, what kind of sponsorship, what kind of things, resources do you provide to those developers? 30 seconds each.
I can go first. So, Hashgraph is a timestamping service, right? And